Hello and welcome. I'm Susan Butterfield and I'm the chair of the Atlantic Human Rights Centre. Before reading my comments, I'd just like to thank the Minister. It's so nice to see passion in the public spaces and passion for justice for each and every person who lives here. So thank you. I'd like to thank, I'm going to say a lot of thank yous to start off with. I want to thank you initially for accepting this invitation to attend the conference. Thank you for coming in on one of the few nice nights that we've had in this month. If I was attending the conference, I'm not sure I would be here or walking on the green. It is my privilege to be the chair of the Atlantic Human Rights Centre at St. Thomas University. And I welcome you to this conference on behalf of the board of the Atlantic Human Rights Centre, Mark Gionnet, our director, and Sharon Forsett, who has been working for the centre. Mark and Sharon have worked very hard over a few months to ensure that we have this opportunity, and it is a great opportunity to talk to each other, to understand our current challenges, and to learn new ways on how we can approach tomorrow. We owe thanks. I told you there'd be lots. We owe thanks to several organizations, excuse me, that are supporting this conference. The Office of the President at St. Thomas University, I should name them first. Two New Brunswick departments, the Department of Education and Early Childhood and the Post-Secondary Education Department. Also the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission, the New Brunswick Social Research and Policy Network, Bell Alliant, and Tony's Music Box. So thank you to all of those partners. I'm not done yet. I felt so grateful when I was writing this. I didn't want to leave anybody out. I want to thank the staff of the Crown Plaza. They have welcomed us and provided us with the supports we need for this conference, and we've been very impressed with the service that we know they're going to provide to all of us. I want to thank the translators, both those who are providing French-English translation and those providing translation in the form of sign language. And last but not least in today's world, to the technology staff who are providing us with all manner of technology, and Bell Alliant, who are live streaming the conference online over the internet. Thank you, Bell Alliant. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Atlantic Human Rights Centre. We're in the midst of renewal, as are most organizations, and this includes our own initiatives to be more inclusive. We want the Atlantic in our name to reflect a broader geography of involvement. We also intend to be recognized as a creative and a collaborative agent for the advancement and promotion of human rights and citizenship regionally, nationally, and internationally. The Centre was created in 1989 and owes much to those first leaders who include the now Senator Noel Kinsella, the late Dr. Abdul Lodi, and most recently Dr. Michael McGowan. The Centre created the Human Rights Program at St. Thomas University, one of the first and still one of the few in Canada. We continue to host lectures, fellowships, conferences, and development institutes. But following a strategic planning exercise in 2011, the Centre identified its priorities to be equality, diversity, and inclusion. This conference on inclusion, as it relates to K-12, universities, and community colleges, came from those priorities. The Centre is using the word inclusion in a broad sense to mean those things which support the equality mandates of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and other related international conventions, and in Canada, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and provincial human rights codes. This equality imperative is one that is based upon the recognition and accommodation of differences, be they linguistic, cultural, of Aboriginal origin, geographic origin, socioeconomic status, levels of ability, to name but a few. Equality demands the accommodation of differences and systemic changes to existing structures and practices so that all students in our school systems and at university and community colleges feel that they really belong and can benefit from that education system. Our intent at the center, and it seems as if we have succeeded, is to bring together researchers, teachers, academics, undergraduate and graduate students, education administrators, NGOs, and government representatives from the regional, national, and international community. I know we've got people here from the States and Spain to discuss the issues. The main theme, as we all know, for this conference is taking stock of inclusion in the education sector. Where have we come from and where are we going? I look forward to our discussions and wish you a successful conference. If there is anything we can do to assist you while you're here, please let us know. Those are my opening comments. And now it's my privilege to introduce the Honourable Graydon Nicholas, the Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick. I'm sure many in this room are very aware of his honour and are admiring of his history and what he has accomplished. He's led a distinguished record of leadership in our community, including more than 18 years of service as a New Brunswick Provincial Court judge. Throughout his career, Mr. Nicholas has also proven to be a dedicated advocate on behalf of New Brunswick's Aboriginal communities. Mr. Nicholas was born and raised on the Tobic First Nation and received his Bachelor of Law from the University of New Brunswick in 1971, becoming the first Aboriginal person to receive a law degree in Atlantic Canada. After earning a Master's of Social Work from Wilfrid Laurier University in 1974, Mr. Nicholas returned to New Brunswick to work with the Union of New Brunswick Indians. And in 1989, he was appointed Chair of Native Studies at St. Thomas University and remained a part-time lecturer in the Native Studies program until 1999. In 1991, Mr. Nicholas was appointed to the bench as a provincial court judge, and during his tenure at the provincial court, he was appointed co-facilitator of New Brunswick's Aboriginal Task Force on Aboriginal Issues. For his long-standing, and I would say outstanding service and community leadership, Mr. Nicholas has received the New Brunswick Human Rights Award, the Fredericton YMCA Peace Medallion, the Canada 125 Medal, and the Golden Jubilee Medal. Mr. Nicholas has served on the Board of Governors at St. Thomas University and is a member of the Canadian Bar Association Working Group on Racial Equality. He has spent much of his career working in the field of Indigenous political development at the regional, national, and international levels and maintains a keen interest in these areas. I'm certainly looking forward to hear what he has to share with us tonight, and I invite you to welcome him with me.
Well, good evening. Bonsoir. Sangakalagilawa. The last one always gets as an attention factor because in my language I'm saying, how are you doing? It's nice to have the Minister of Education here, Honourable Jody Carr, and he and I go to many meetings together. Of course, Dr. Craig at St. Thomas, and also Susan. Thank you very, very much for your kind words. And for all of you delegates who are here from around the world, is what I'll say, I guess. And also for this beautiful woman who's helping to translate my Malseed into your language. Dungog. How are you in Malseed? Dungog. Hey, there we go. Okay, all right. There you go. Well, first of all, welcome to my traditional territory. I am a member of the Wolastoqiyik, Behind this beautiful building is a river that's called St. John, but in my language it's called Wolastoquk. Wolastoquk, in my language, means the good river. So the people who would have lived along the river from the mouth of the bay in St. John, which we call it, all the way up to what we would call northern Maine, where the source of the St. John River would begin. This good river, Wolastoquk, is what provided a lifeline to my ancestors. I have a deep love for this river. And how much the river has meant to my particular tribe, because that was the only highway. That was the only 4-lane that existed back then. Because, of course, you could have more than 4 or 5 or 6 birch bark canoes going at once, all in the same direction or against one another, depending on the current, depending on the tide. So I am deeply honored to be with you here. As you consider very, very fundamental questions, when I looked at your literature and I saw those questions, trying to think now like a social scientist, where have we come from? I assume the question is, where are we today? And then for the future, where are we going? You know where you are now? So it's always important in the history of humanity and in the evolution of policies to advance the interests and causes of people to know where the conditions were, what they were, the barriers, the challenges, the borders. So someone or somebody or a group decided we're not satisfied with the status quo. And then change can begin to take place. Situations will emerge which draws people together so they'll have a deep interest for a particular cause as a community, as a family, or even as an individual, and sometimes even a country. This is why I think it's important that you gather as people with a great heart, people with tremendous compassion, people who are very attentive, very good listeners, people who want to see if life can improve. I should also say that I'm very grateful for your invitation. I wish I could attend because I looked at your agenda. I was very privileged to know Dr. Lodi, who was one of the founders of the Atlantic Human Rights Center at St. Thomas University. Because it was in 1989 when I began to work at the university, and our offices were in the same building. So we would see each other in the morning and in the afternoon, and sometimes in the evening. And perhaps for those of you that did not know Dr. Lodi, he was a man with a deep conscience. He came from a different culture. He came from a different homeland, but he believed in equality. He was a firm believer in respect. He was a firm believer in change. And it was his philosophy that good people gather together, having discussions, and more discussions until everyone understood, then change could begin to occur. He believed in the instruments of human rights that in fact were not only declared and pronounced at the United Nations level, but also from the federal and provincial governments. Because he knew that humanity would not change and care for one another unless there was this deep respect. So that is what I see the challenges that you face over the next few days. In my long career of, I'll say, ongoing education, that's the best way to describe my life. You know, when I began school in the fall of 1951, I was young, 5 years old, did not know a word of English. It was just the night before that my older brothers and sisters told me, tomorrow you start school for the first time. And I'll let you know what it sounds like in my language, just in case you've never heard my language that much before. So here's what they told me. I'll say it in English after, but I'll have to teach you some more Maliseet. Zebonokil Amsquask Naji Widigakims. Tomorrow morning, for the very first time, you're going to go to school. The teacher who's going to teach you will ask you, what is your name? If the teacher asks you what your name is, tell her that your name is Graydon. So the night before I started school was the first time I knew I had a name Graydon. Because in my community, you were a child of someone else. You were a brother of someone else. Or we had a nickname. So sure enough, next morning, bright and early, I go to school and the teacher asks you what your name is. And I was able to answer that. When she asked me what my last name was, I had no idea there was such a thing as a last name. You know, surname, what's that? I said, and I think I told her Graydon again. That's the only name I knew. And because in my community, everybody knew your family. So you were identified with your family. And my good friend didn't even know his first name. And as a result, because I was sitting by him, the teacher thought he was being rude and that I was coaching him. Both of us ended up staying in school for the first day of school in 1952. What a way to start a school education. And by the time I got home, Mom said, "What did you do?" I said, "I didn't do anything, I don't think." So I asked her, "Well, what is a last name?" She says, "What do you mean?" I said, "I don't know. The teacher asked me what is my last name, and I had no idea what my last name was." So then, of course, she told me our last name. And so I found out what it was. And by the time the spring of 1952 came along, when I got that favorite report card that all teachers give out this time of the year, I opened it and it said the old Tim Hortons slogan, "Try again." Because I could not read English. Just think if you have children now or grandchildren. And if you're a grandparent like I am, we always want to give our grandchildren a start. So we start reading to them, whether they understand it or not, almost from the time they're born. And as they grew up, we get them to describe the pictures that's in these books, so they'll get used to words. And then when they start kindergarten, they'll not only know the words, but actually start reading. As I go around in our province of New Brunswick, one of the goals I had when I was appointed the Lieutenant Governor of province in September 2009 was to visit every school in our province. I have a 5-year mandate. I've been able to visit 115 schools, but there's not enough time to visit all the schools in this province. But I want to tell you about a couple schools that I have had the privilege to visit. Because this issue of inclusiveness surfaces in New Brunswick a lot. One school not far from the city here in New Maryland has a as a child, a student who's confined in a wheelchair, can't talk, has great difficulty in communicating, but that child is so loved in that school that the students help that child and make sure that she's included in all the class activity and also any functions that the school sponsors. And to me, that's the perfect example of a worth of a human being, where these young children are taught at such a young age to have compassion, to have love, to care, to accept, and to help someone who's different than they are. And if that's what inclusive education teaches, then we need that throughout the whole world. Because this is where human understanding, this is where the bullying will stop. This is where the differences will be accepted and not seen as a negative. This is where we'll realize as a family, as a country, as a province, as communities, that there are strengths and differences. And we should, in fact, celebrate our differences, no matter what they are. You know, this country that we call Canada began as a multicultural, multilingual, and multi-spiritual way. And I'm just talking about the First Nations before the arrival of the first Europeans. Because even if you look at the province of British Columbia, with almost 16 different languages, 16 different cultures, 16 different forms of government, it's beautiful. And so often when I talk about that passage of history, when I go to universities in particular, students will ask, how did they get along? How did they communicate? Well, just in this area of the country, which we call Wabanaki. Wabanaki means the people of the dawn. I mean, this is where the sun first appears. Waban, the sun. So the different tribes just in this area, the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet as they're called now, the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, all the different tribes in the United States Northeast, Eastern Canada had a confederacy. They had different languages, but through trade, through culture, they were able to communicate with one another. Because there were people in the communities who were trained specially to communicate with another society, another tribe. And once you left I guess now you would go into Quebec. When you get to Montreal, which is the territory of the Haudenosaunee, I guess, but in English we call them Iroquois Confederacy. There were linkages between the Wabanaki Confederacy and the Iroquois Confederacy. And through their organizational structure, there were connections with the Anishinaabe, the Cree. The Anishinaabe in Ontario are called differently than what we're used to. They call them Ojibwe, but in their language they call themselves Anishinaabe. And through those linkages with the tribes in the Northeast, there were linkages right out to the Mississippi Valley. Again, confederacies of tribes of different languages, different cultures, and different values. And how it was important in these linkages then that they understood and knew one another. That's why peace prevailed. Historians will say there was warfare. But who wrote the history books? In the culture of our people, we knew there was peace. And that's important to understand then, and I take great efforts to explain that to you because some of you come from different areas of this beautiful country and in the United States. Once you can understand the history of the origins of your area, then you can see then that the First Nations in those areas need to be involved in the educational system. I was, through that process of first integration, assimilation, and all these other buzzwords that social scientists were introducing in the 50s and 60s, a lot of it borrowed from American melting pot theories, which didn't work in the United States. It almost resulted in the termination of Aboriginal identity in the United States because everybody had to be American. You could not have your particular ethnic origin at those times. And so it dominated the educational system, which then crossed the border into Canada. And if you look at some of the history books that are written, you'll see back then why perhaps in the first chapter they'll say, yes, the Cree were here, the Maliseets were here, but beyond that, once the European countries came, their history dominated. And so it was in that setting then that many of our people felt left out. They didn't want to stay in school. The teachers who were teaching them did not know Indigenous history. They couldn't appreciate this historical value. And I'm using only one of those differences which exist in our world today. So in order then to understand where you are, this is why the question is so fundamental to me. This is why it's so challenging, you see. Because we can't bury the past. We have to acknowledge the past. Because the past is going to make us that much stronger. The past is also then our rootedness to see the contributions that are made by all peoples in the continued harmony of our country. And when you assert a right, you're upsetting somebody right off the bat. Because they'll say, why don't you want to be like me? You know, one time I was in this great debate. It's always in universities where you get these great debates, and the students said, well, why don't the Indians want to accept the current system? I said, well, that's a very good question. That's an extremely good question. In order to answer that, I'm going to give you an analogy. I said, when your ancestors first arrived here, was the Maliseet language a compulsory for them? Was the Maliseet religion forced on them? Was the Maliseet system of education and government enforced? Startled him. He said, well, yeah, but your people weren't civilized. And I said, whose definition of civilization are you using? You see, because we have to remember roots. We have to remember those origins and respect. Because in order to create, you have to include. And no matter what it is, the interest that you are trying to promote, in order to make sure you have like-minded people, have a dialogue. Don't be afraid to ask questions what this student asked me. The answers may not be good, but the questions are real. And the questions are what motivate us to strive towards something better. So that's why I think your conference here, you're probably at a turning point in some aspects of the particular interests that you cherish. And it's important. It's important to acknowledge that. It's important that you understand that. It's important that to continue that stride forward. Because if you don't, who will? If you don't have the commitment, then what's that say about the generations that'll follow you? You know, recently I've been using this Chinese proverb a lot. And it says, if you think 1 year ahead, plant some food. In that particular circumstance is rice. If you think 10 years ahead, plant some trees. If you plan for a lifetime, educate a person. And that's so appropriate for what you're doing, because you're educating one another. And when you leave this conference, you're going to take that back to your colleagues and friends and people you serve, more enriched, hopefully more empowered, but definitely more challenging so that you can inspire others. And it's only then that as you look behind you, it'll be more than just your shadow. You'll have other like-minded people who believe in that road, on that journey that you're on. And it should never stop. Even once you reach that golden age of 65 or whatever the age will be in the future, when you can retire. Never stop. Pause to rest, but never stop. Because inequities and inequalities don't stop. There'll always be a new barrier that needs to be removed. There'll always need to be an expansion of boundaries so that more people can be included in a greater quality of life. And I want to close with a couple of things. I know the camera's down there, but I want to show you a beautiful picture that was just given to me yesterday. Anyway, I can't put it up, but I'll describe what it is. It is a sketch of Her Majesty. This year, we know, is the Diamond Jubilee of Her Majesty. See, one of my second objectives is to visit as many senior homes in our province, because I respect the people that live there because of their knowledge. And in my culture, the elders are the most revered persons because they are the human, walking, living libraries. You don't need high tech for that. All you need is time. And so when I went to visit this senior home in Stanley, this woman who couldn't talk, who had difficulty moving her hands, knew I was coming. And someone told her that, you know, he's the representative of Her Majesty in our province. She was so excited, she decided to color this for me. I said, even I could never stay within the lines as she did. And Her Majesty may have new colors, but that's all right. But it was the beauty of her giving, you see. It was telling me that she was so excited that I was there and coming there that she wanted to give me something. And so, as I usually do in the hallways of Government House, I hang up these things that people give me, children, all different situations. And I told her, this is going to go up. She'll probably never come to Government House, but she'll have friends and family who'll go there. And I'm sure I'll let her know that I'm true to my word, that I'll display it there with great pride. So when people walk to say, what's that? How come that's up? Well, if you don't believe in something, if you don't advocate something, people will quickly know how sincere you are in the efforts you try to promote. The last thing I want to say is, again, one of these little quotations that I've been using a lot. And I think everybody knows who Helen Keller is. But here are the words. I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but I can still do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something I can do. I will not refuse to do the something I can do. So once again, thank you very much, merci beaucoup pour votre invitation pour ce soir. Je suis très heureux d'être ici avec vous. I thank you for gathering. I thank you for leaving your families behind and your communities behind and your colleagues. So you can sit down, you can listen, you can learn. Recharge your batteries and realize that the struggle you're in as an individual, you're not alone. But there are other like-minded people who will support you. So thank you very much, and I want to wish you continued success, not only this weekend, but more importantly, when you return to your homes, because that's where, again, it will begin. Thank you very much. Merci.